So, yeah, okay, yes. Sorry, because I got it. Yeah, all right. So I'm here to talk to you about what should any lifestyle medicine professional know about environmental health. This is going to be my topic today. And 2 years ago, I was here again in this certificate to talk about some very basic concepts of environmental health and how those concepts affect lifestyle medicine. So I would strongly advise anyone who is interested in the topic to watch this previous invited speaker is the video is at the Facebook group of European Lifestyle Medicine Certificates group. And at that talk, we had covered some very basic ideas that I'm going to just mention here, and I'm going to go forward. So we had talked about how big is the problem of environmental chemicals, toxic chemicals around us. We had talked about which are the systems of our body that they affect the most. We talked about the endocrine disrupting chemicals, about obesogens. We talked about the concept of critical epigenetic window, and we explained why kids, pregnant women, breastfeeding kids are the most vulnerable to those toxic chemicals. We also explained main pathways of those chemicals, which are obviously diet is one of the most important, and I'm going to come back to that. We also explained two very important ideas, concepts, which are the bioaccumulation and biomagnification. And we described why those ideas are very important for us to understand why the diet is the most important pathway to our exposure of environmental chemicals. And at the end, as Ion said earlier, we talked about the connection of environmental health with planetary health. And we talked about our need as humanity to move into a new way of thinking where human health, planetary health, and animals' health is one united thing. So this was the previous invited speech. I advise you to go at the Facebook group and watch it. But today I decided not to say the same again, since all these things are already in a video. Today I decided to focus in 8 facts and one goal that any lifestyle medicine professional should know about environmental health. So the first fact is that the most vulnerable population groups to those environmental contaminants are the couples, the people who want to conceive, especially those who face problems with unexplained infertility, pregnant women, breastfeeding babies, and kids, especially kids which are under 3 years old, but also some adolescents, the ones who we see facing some hormonal problems. So any health professional who works on lifestyle medicine should be able to understand that when we address those population groups, our recommendations should always be focused under the prisma of environmental chemicals. The second fact that we need to talk about here is our ability, or sometimes, most of the times, inability, to find the elephant in the room. What does this mean? So, as Ion explained earlier, I'm an environmental chemist, so I'm actually an analytical chemist. I am very used in going around with my calculator and always making calculations. But for most medical professionals, this is not very obvious, and very often we see that medical professionals talk about toxic chemicals in a very vague way, I would say, in a way that no one really understands which is the determinant factor of those exposures. So any lifestyle medicine professional should be able to always keep asking, which is the determinant factor of this exposure? And then using numeracy skills to assess these factors. Third fact is our misconceptions about pesticides. So the determinant factor of our exposure to pesticides and other environmental pollutants is animal origin food. A lot of people, whether it is citizens or medical professionals, when they listen to the word pesticides, they immediately think of sprayed potatoes and strawberries and broccoli. But because of the concept of bioaccumulation and biomagnification, and because of the cycles, environmental cycles that those chemicals make in our environment, we now know for sure that the concentrations of pesticides and other environmental pollutants in the animal origin food, in eggs, meat, especially the fat of the meat, are many folds higher. It can be 100 times higher, 200 times higher, depending on the chemical, in the animal-based food, in eggs, in meat, in dairy, in also fish. And I'm going to come back to that. The fourth fact that any medical professional should know, any lifestyle medicine professional should know, is that the biological or organic produce does not reduce the concentration of environmental chemicals. Many of us think that, if meat or if eggs are very high in dioxins or in PCBs, then I will buy organic, I will buy biological meat. Unfortunately, we do have today a lot of studies that have proved that organic and biological produce of animal-based food not only does not reduce those chemicals, but many times it even leads to higher concentrations of those chemicals. Like, for example, in organic meat, those study which I have here is from Spain. It was shown that the organic meat had even higher concentration of persistent organic pollutants, these POPs chemicals. Studies which have been done in organic milk have shown that the conventional milk has this 0.2 to 3.8 picogram of toxic equivalent of dioxins per gram of fat, while this number was 25 at the organic milk. And this study I have on the top right here is a study measuring the some dioxin-like compounds of backyard produced eggs from the Netherlands, which unfortunately, it's a very new study. I think it's 2016 or yeah. More than 50% of those eggs had values that by far exceeded the European maximum limit. The next fact, the fifth fact, I'm going to share 8 facts. The fifth fact, which everyone should know, is that the current usual recommended consumption of dairy, eggs, and fish massively exceeds the tolerable weekly intake of most, I would say, almost all of those environmental chemicals that we are more concerned about today. Maybe you have already seen, maybe you have already discussed with me on that in the traditional Mediterranean diet, Fish is suggested to be consumed few times per week, and dairy and eggs is usually suggested to be consumed almost daily or many times per week. So I'm gonna come back to these recommendations, and I'm gonna show you that these recommendations and these calculations have to be made again so that we understand what are the concentrations of environmental pollutants that we are led if we eat everyday eggs and many times per week our fish. So the number 6, the sixth fact is that fish is a major, very often it is the determinant factor of our exposure to many of those environmental chemicals that we are concerned about. It is the dioxins and dioxin-like compounds. It is the flame retardants that are very high in fish. It is the PCBs. It is the perfluoride alkyl substances. These PFAS are the forever chemicals. Maybe you have heard about them called like that. And of course, traditionally, we know that heavy metals are usually in high concentrations in fish. And I want to just sit here to explain what do we mean about major or determinant factor, okay? We see people, for example, worrying if they live next to an electricity plant about the dioxin they inhale through the air pollution. But we know that fish is responsible for more of 90% of our exposure to dioxins. Depending on the contaminant, if it is PCBs or flame retardants or heavy metals, fish and seafood can be responsible from 40% to 90% of our exposure, of our total exposure to those chemicals. And this exposure for most of the chemicals today is estimated to be tens of folds higher of our limit. So here I'm gonna take you back to some of our calculations. I hope it's not very tiring. I'm gonna go through that a little fast, and that's why I put it on the screen. So if we just take the example of dioxins and dioxin-like compounds, the total, higher tolerable weekly intake was brought to 2 picograms toxic equivalent per kilo per week from 14. It was from 14, 2018, and it was brought down to 2, exactly because we keep seeing more and more adverse effects of those compounds in our health. So let's take a little girl here. I put this picture. She really reminds me of my daughter, who is exactly 2 years old now. So a 2-year-old child would be from anywhere from 12 to 15 kgs of body weight. That would mean that in a week, this child could safely have the intake of 24 to 30 picograms of toxic equivalents of dioxins and dioxin-like compounds. Let's take now the hypothesis that this child eats 1 egg this week, 1 slice of cheese, and 1 portion of fish. I chose sardine here because it's an average fish very usual in Europe. So if you just do the calculations, I mean, we know that eggs have very average concentrations of dioxins, which are between 5 to 10. The study that I had earlier at the home-produced eggs of Netherlands, it was up to 80. The number was up to 80. So here I just chose a very average and very low numbers, 5 to 10 picograms. That would, because this is per gram of fat, okay? So each egg has 5 grams of fat average. So that would end up to 25 to 50 picogram of toxic equivalents from the egg alone. I do the same for the slice of cheese. I just multiply the grams of fat with the average concentrations, and I reach to 180 to 450 picograms. I do the same for the seafood. Seafood, as you see, the average seafood concentrations are between 100 to 200 picograms toxic equivalent. So if we have an average fish, fat fish, which is 15% fat, and an average portion, which is 80 grams, we end up to 1200 or 1400, somewhere between that, picograms of toxic equivalent. If you sum up these things, you see that the child, this 2-year-old year, just by eating one egg, one slice of cheese, and one portion of fish, she exceeds the total weekly intake by 100 times almost, like from 50 to 100 times. That's just massive, okay? So this study that I have here is a study from Greece from 2022. They did exactly that. They took another substance. It's not dioxins here. This is the perfluoride alkyl substances, and they measured fish, eggs, and drinking water to see which of these are determinant, which are they are responsible for our exposure. And here they don't study pregnant women, they don't study small kids. They have, you know, the average human, the average adult. So still with those numbers, the results is that for all those chemicals that they studied, we had exceedance of the tolerable weekly intake. And it says that especially for fish and seafood, which are known to bioaccumulate and seem to contribute the most to total exposure, countries should continuously perform random and targeted monitor surveys to protect public health. So such studies nowadays we have a lot from all over the world. I hope the calculations were not very tiring, but I really believe we really need to take out our calculations, calculators to understand these numbers. So the first online meeting, scientific meeting on the risks, on studying the risks versus the benefits of combined exposure to nutrients and contaminants through food with focus the fish consumption was just taken place a few days ago, from 15 to 17 February. There was an online event, the first of its kind. I really believe this is massive. This is very good news. And this is available online. So if you just Google that title, you'll go to this website, and where it says documents on the side, you can find some PDF from some presentations that they are very interesting to see. So fact 7. In the very near future, Mediterranean diet recommendations will be adjusted to the risk of environmental contaminants. I am sure that very soon we are not gonna have this pyramid for the total population. We are not gonna be addressing pregnant women and children that are under 3 years old, or adolescents with hormonal issues with the same nutritional recommendations. And here on the left, this is the first slide of the talk that the Director General for Health and Food Safety had on that meeting that I told you earlier. This is available online. And one 2022 article from some scientists that did exactly that. So they measured the fatty acids in pelagic fish species, the omega-3, the good stuff we know we take from our fish, and they tried to assess the risks, many risks, not all of them, obviously, but many risks from the consumption of those fish. And this work, I think, is showing where our study will be leading at. Fact 8, and this is the last fact before our goal, which will finish my speech, is that our most important shield, protective shield against the environmental toxic chemicals, the contaminants, is fibers and antioxidants. So food which is very high in fiber has the ability to reduce the bioavailability and the effects of many of those chemicals, especially when we talk about heavy metals, about dioxins. Those molecules, they very usually work through a very high stress, oxidative stress on our body. So both fibers and antioxidants are number one intervention that should be suggested to people that we believe that they need more protection against environmental contaminants. And we have many reviews, many papers on that subject, on various, on dioxins, on persistent organic pollutants, on heavy metals. The literature is full of such proof. Finally, and I'm closing my speech with this goal. I believe that any lifestyle medicine professional should have in their mind that when we advise, especially on nutritional interventions, we should try to propose meaningful, realistic, culturally appropriate, socio-economic tailored, and population group specific intervention. That would mean that if you go to a family with 3 small kids and you say, oh, to protect your kids from heavy metals and dioxins and pesticides, please shift to an organic diet. That advice is not a good piece of advice because it can be very expensive. It can be not producing the result that you want. It can be maybe sometimes not meaningful, you know, because if the family change the meat consumption, high meat consumption into an organic meat consumption, as I showed you earlier, that would make no improvement, and it could even lead to a higher intake of environmental chemicals. So we can have in our mind that instead of saying shift to an organic diet, we can say reduce animal origin food and increase plant-based food to protect yourself from those chemicals. Instead of saying replace meat with fish, we can think of to whom are we giving this advice? Is it like maybe a 50-year-old man that all his life was eating animal protein? Yeah, replace meat with fish would be maybe a good advice. But if it is a pregnant woman, or if it is a couple that has low sperm count or problems with other problems with infertility, then that advice maybe is a wrong piece of advice. So we could say replace meat, dairy, and eggs with legumes, seeds, and nuts to get a much safer amount of protein from environmental point of view. And this is where I end